This is a conversation with Zbigniew PISARSKI, a leading Polish foreign policy and security analyst, president of the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, and a founder of the Warsaw Security Forum. In this conversation, we talk about Poland, and specifically about its rise as a new geopolitical and military power. We discuss why does Poland spend far more on defense than any other NATO member? How did its military transform since 2014? Or how is Poland's rise shaping European politics? And much more. The corporate sponsor of this podcast is Conductor, which provides software for crisis exercises for everything from cyber threats and supply chain security to hybrid warfare. And it's also supported by generous patrons that you can join to get various perks. And now, enjoy the conversation. So, welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure.
I'd like to talk about a lot of different topics that are part of Poland's foreign policy and defense and security. But I think if we look at Poland today, it's generally regarded as a leader, without a doubt, when it comes to European security, either because of its defense spending and how much it spends on defense, or because how it pushes the rest of Europe to take the Russian threat seriously. But I'd like to start by going back in time a little bit, before 2022 and before the entire Europe sort of woke up to how grave the Russian threat is. And I'd like to talk about a little bit, how did this understanding of the Russian threat and the need for a strong military, for a strong defense develop in Poland before 2022? And if it emerged with the annexation of Crimea or with the war in Georgia, or if it's something that has just always been there?
Well, I would say that perception of Russia as a potential threat towards Poland was present in our society for decades. And I would say that Poles are immunized from Russian propaganda by its history. And therefore, we were not that easy to be seduced or manipulated by Russian narratives, which were directed towards West. And therefore, we were somehow without this influence, and we had always this distance towards the very pro-democratic narratives that we've seen from Moscow towards world about the partnership and win-win approach. We remember that Russia is a realpolitik player and that they do not recognize win-win approach and that there is either winning or losing. And this is something what is different from the Western system of values. And if we take a look at the Polish history, starting from 18th century, for instance, even where our patron, General Casimir Pulaski, was struggling in stopping the Polish royalty from close ties with Russian Empire, which actually was the reason why he had to go in exile and ended up in the United States creating American cavalry as the founding father of American cavalry. But since then, since 18th century, Poles were struggling to sustain its independency, its democracy, and the main threat always was Russia. And with this historical experience, even after Poland regained, after 123 years, its independency in 1918, it was only 2 years later when Bolsheviks again attacked Poland and wanted to kidnap our independency. So with that in mind, with the outcome of Yalta, with the communistic oppression towards Poland between the Second World War and 1989 till Lech Walesa. So we have our experience, which definitely shaped our perception of certain distrust towards Russian intentions and neo-imperialistic sentiments, which are till this day in Moscow elites, ruling elites. So with this distrust, we were always trying to be a bit skeptic towards easy acceptance of Russian intentions. And I must say that for a number of years, Russians were calling Poles as Russophobes. And I would say that we were simply always Russo-realists. And actually, after a full-scale invasion, I had the chance to experience firsthand in Rzeszów, where I was for the first 3 months almost every week, receiving international delegations, ministerial and other from all around the world, and they were coming to Poland. They wanted to have so-called Ukrainian experience, get as close to the border as possible, and they were, for this very brief moment of time, they were very understanding Polish perspective, and they said, "Well, you were right, we were wrong. And right now we want to listen to you more carefully because it seems that you were correct. You knew something what we didn't see. And right now we all have to pay the price for it, and mostly Ukrainians, of course." So there is a certain experience, but also justified lesson from history that makes Poles more credible towards Russian policy in the region, and we have this expertise from the centuries.
You mentioned that there was a brief moment when people from outside of Poland were willing to listen to Poland. Do you think that this moment is going away already, and the willingness to listen to Poland and its view of Russia is decreasing, or is it something that's here to stay?
Well, I would compare it somehow to pandemia experience. We believed that we'll never get back to normal because it was so transformative experience during the COVID time. But when we had a chance to get back to normal, immediately everyone get back to the old tracks. And I would say the same habits are among our friends and allies from NATO and EU. And although they were very open for the Polish suggestions in the first months, because we simply were right with a potential threat, and our response was also adequate, and were pioneers and leaders of support for Ukraine, and we are still. But of course, we have a pragmatic interests of a number of countries. Some of them, they want to get back to normal. Some of them are simply distant from this region, and they got distracted. They focus on other things, and then they start questioning if countries of this region are maybe biased, maybe self-interests, and for that reason our voice is a bit weaker. However, I must say that it was a catalyst. The Polish response to aggression towards Ukraine, it was a catalyst of Poland entering to the first European League. And I would say that with the former populistic government in Poland, we haven't been using an opportunity which occurred for Poland as the outcome of Brexit. There was empty seat in the first row waiting for the country number 3 in the EU, and it could be Poland instead of UK. And instead of that, taking the seat, unfortunately our government decided to be very critical towards Brussels instead of taking the seat and shaping EU policy. And I would say that after the aggression on Ukraine, we took the momentum, we got back this chance again, and we took this seat. Then there was, of course, like every country, some domestic pragmatic interests, like during recent parliamentarian campaign in Poland, where Ukrainian issue was also an element of polarization of domestic constituencies, which resulted in demolishing some Polish Ukrainian sentiments. But I would say it's still much better than it was before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So both Polish position in EU, Polish position in NATO, and Polish-Ukrainian cooperation, all of it are at very good level right now.
You mentioned that Poland is now taking possibly the role of the country number 3 in the EU and in Europe in general, and that follows up nicely into one of the big topics I want to talk about, because one of the big aspects of why Poland is able to do that is its military, and the fact that it now has, or recently has been announced that Poland now has NATO's 3rd largest military, which, especially now after the invasion of Ukraine, Europe really started to see that as a value that is really important and that Europe doesn't really have, and so Poland is seen as a very valuable member in that way. So if we can talk about it a little bit, and if you can maybe describe how the Polish military transformed since 2014 and how those changes then accelerated after the invasion of Ukraine.
That's true. Poland is on a track to build the largest land army in Europe. And because we have to be ready for a potential threat. And Pulaski Foundation, which I have a pleasure to chair, is running a number of war game simulations. And in all those exercises, we experience the first wave of defense is our own burden. We have to do it on our own. And we are talking about weeks that we have to survive on our own. And for that reason, we are building a large army. Just to give you an example of what improvements Poland adopted in the last decade. For instance, we established territorial defense, which is about to be about 50,000 additional voluntary troops. So these are local, a bit less trained, but very well positioned in local communities, soldiers that will help in urban warfare or slow down the potential advances of aggressor troops. Poland is using, in fact, the last invasion on Ukraine as an excuse to fast track modernization of its military. We not only replaced equipment which we delivered to Ukraine, we also multiplied it. So even Polish President Duda, in one of his last interviews, he mentioned that Poland not only gave around 400 tanks to Ukraine, but we also gave around 1,000 pieces of vehicles from Poland. Of course, different quality, but the number is significant. 3% of Polish GDP was the value of the support for Ukraine. This is 3% of the Polish GDP. It's a big number. So it was also in our interest to strengthen our army. And right now, with procurements of both aircrafts, Poland is right now waiting for its first F-35. Poland has its own squadrons of F-16 aircrafts, but we also decided to extend our cooperation not only with European partners, but for instance, we made a contract for 1,000 tanks from South Korea, and I think right now there will be probably a bigger cooperation also with European partners because of the recent change of government, which is much more open towards European partners. The former one was not very much excited about working with German colleagues So they were looking for substitutes outside of Europe. Of course, it's not the only reason, but in fact, we have right now in the Polish armed forces a variety of equipment. Even with tanks, we have American Abrams, we have German Leopards. Right now, we have Korean tanks as well, and of course, a few pieces of the post-Soviet equipment still in service. But of course, it's a struggle. So right now we have a lot of equipment, but we have to learn how to use it, how to run operations which are integrated among different layers of military defense. Therefore, we all are learning from Ukraine. And actually, these multi-domain missions that Ukrainians are performing in the east of their country, this is something what is inspiring also us and redefining our needs for future procurements and modernization. If you take a look at the role that UAVs, flying munition, and other cheap flying weapon systems are serving a significant role in Ukraine. This is something what will redefine not only the battlefield, but also defense industries around the world. If you compare the value of one military-grade helicopter is between 10 and 30 million US dollars. And on another hand, you have a flying munition which costs, let's say, 1,000, 3,000 US dollars. We are talking about the number of effectors that you can buy or produce relatively cheap. And even recently, there were some videos showing that drones were used to attack helicopters. So this is the revolution which is taking place as we speak, and those lessons will be taken from Ukraine by all our allies, but also enemies. So we have to adapt to this new reality, and Poland wants to be among the pioneers of this process. I can tell you that even this week actually. The Polish coalition was consulting its finances, the budget of Poland for the next year, 2025. And there are informations that Poland might spend up to 5% of its GDP on defense. So almost double what Donald Trump is demanding from NATO members as of today or yesterday, what he announced. But I'm just showing that we are about the leaders in this defense spending, because it's simply this is very personal to us. I mean, it's a direct threat. The war is behind our border, and actually only yesterday the border was crossed by some probably Shahid drones. From the Iranian production, but yeah, this is very direct threat to Poland.
I think I have to stop on this for a minute, because I really find it fascinating and something that really makes Poland unique, because other Eastern Central European countries like the Czech Republic like to say that they have also seen the Russian threat, a long time before the invasion of Ukraine. But if you look at how they spend their money and whether they put their money where their mouth is, it's usually not the case. And in Czech Republic, we only started spending 2% of GDP this year for the first time. And Poland, in this regard, is really unique, not just in compared to the rest of Europe, but even compared, for example, with the Baltic countries or Finland, who also have this very direct perception of the Russian threat. And if Poland would give 5% of GDP, that would be more than twice as much as countries like Germany or the UK or even the United States spend on defense. So why do you think I guess I still find it so unusual that I have to ask again, why do you think that the society is so willing to accept this level of spending, which is really, really unusual? And why do you think that Poland is willing to spend even more than countries like Estonia or Lithuania that are very willing to spend the money and are really taking the defense serious as well?
If you take a look at the so-called principal needs that humans have, security is among number one or the highest priorities for our primary needs. So it creates an environment also for decision makers where there is full support of the society for defense spending, and I must say that generally in Poland there is a consensus about foreign policy and security, but in case of defense spending, it was never so high. And we know that, and people understand in the Polish families, it's still unfortunately vivid that we have, our grandparents or family members who recall what it was, Russians on September 17th, 1939, entering Polish border from the east. And they stop in the back, and what was the Russian presence in Poland, what it meant. And so we identify with the victims of Russian aggression in Ukraine. It's personal, it's something imaginable, it's something what has its face, what has its sentiments in the families, what has its wounds, and for that reason there is no hesitation to sacrifice some financial comfort for the sake of security. And even if we take a look from the very pragmatic way, these are the best spent money. We give them, we just spend money. We don't spend our human capital. We don't send our children to war. We give weapon, we give money to our friends in Ukraine, and they take the whole cost of it, including human life. So if there would be ever a comfortable war, this is one of the most comfortable war for every taxpayer in the world, particularly in a direct threat in a country like Poland, where we have a border with Russia. It's worth to remind sometimes that we have a Kaliningrad region where is border with Russia, and we have border with Belarus, which from strategic perspective is also a border with Russia. So we have this understanding, and politicians, they love spending money. So if they feel that they have so big support that they are even they hear thank you for spending extra money. So this is quite unique, but it's simply relevant. And we do it also on behalf of our EU and NATO partners. So we got this specialization in land forces, and we treat it seriously. I think that there has not been a moment in the recent history after Second World War where defense spendings were so adequate right now. So even if you take a look, there was this commentary of presidential candidate Donald Trump that if he will be a president, he will demand NATO members to spend 3% GDP NATO countries. If not, he will not help them in a brutal way. But I might not be a fan of this gentleman. But if we take a look at the statistics, until the end of Cold War, NATO countries were spending 3% GDP on its defense. And I would say that the level of stress and risk and threat we have at least like during the Cold War. And so I don't see a reason to be hesitant about spending 3% GDP immediately on defense from the countries, particularly in Europe. So we have to take responsibility for our own security. If we will not pay for it, someone else will pay for it, but will have also its demands, and we might not like it.
I think one of the things that's really interesting in this discussion is that Poland has announced this target goal of having the military size of 300,000 soldiers, professional and territorial guard. But it seems that the leadership doesn't want to reintroduce conscription, even though a lot of other countries from Netherlands, Scandinavia, Baltics are doing that, are bringing conscription back and are more moving towards the model of a small professional army and larger reserve forces, whereas Poland doesn't seem to want to do that. Why is that? Is there any discussion about reintroducing conscription in Poland as well?
Well, first, right now, the size of the Polish armed forces, including territorial defense, it's around 300,000 troops. But we have even more ambitious plans. The updated plans are that Poland aspires to have 450,000 troops till 2039. And so we still in the next 15 years want to increase it for next 50%. The questions are like this. Do we have enough equipment? Mm-hmm. This is one of the justification for continuation of procurements and increasing the number of equipment that will to shape the number of divisions that we want to have and brigades and so on. And that's what you said. Do we have enough of people? And that's a challenge, because unfortunately the birth rate in Poland is bad, and it's decreasing year after year, and it might be difficult. So what you said, that obligatory service would be one of the solutions, but it's not, unfortunately, politically attractive, not like in case of defense spending. And people don't want to have it obligatory. So the intention and plan for decision makers is that they will try to make it attractive, and that people will voluntarily choose career in military as alternative to the private sector, so or public sector in other branches. So as far as we can observe, the results of the recent incentive programs, promotion programs of military service, it's not that bad. Probably it could be faster, but as I mentioned, 300,000 troops, we almost are there. So no obligatory service for now, but of course, if the situation will change and the threat level will increase, it might be changed. But for now, rather carrot than the stick.
Are there any concerns at all whether this is sustainable in the military sides and the level of spending, or is that generally accepted that there's no discussion about that?
Well, about general defense spending, there is full acceptance, as I mentioned before. But if it's sustainable, there is quite a lot of domestic debate if we are able to deliver what we announce. And there will be a struggle. There might be a delay with achieving this level of 450,000 troops, as I mentioned, till 2039. But it's about trend, and trend is to increase the army. And as you see, this year we spent 4% GDP on defense, next year 5% GDP, so equipment is getting there. And the procurement process is, it's 2, 3 to 7, 8 years. It depends of how sophisticated the platform is that we are purchasing. But it will be a constant process, I assume, for the next few years, at least. Even if end of the war in Ukraine will be behind the corner, what I hope is, but we'll have to make sure that we'll have enough equipment for all the divisions that are in the process of establishment in Poland. So the promotion of service in military will be ongoing.
Just a quick break here. In the coming months, I will be starting a newsletter focused on what you need to know and what you might have missed in geopolitics. It's completely free and you can already sign up for it, and it would be quite helpful if you do that. You can find the link for the sign up in the description below. And now, back to the conversation. Another major development was that a couple months ago, Poland announced that it will build this large series of fortification and defense lines along its border with Belarus, which is similar to something that the Baltic countries are already doing on their border with Russia. What will this look like, and is there a specific reason behind this, or is it sort of a contingency for worst case scenario and an outright invasion?
Well, this so-called East Shield, because this is how we call it in Poland, this is a project that is the Polish response to what our colleagues are doing, this Baltic defense line that you mentioned from the Baltic states. And this is also a response towards these hybrid threats or new generation warfare, which is Europe and NATO experiencing with use of migrants. And Poland, for the last 2 years at least, or even 3, is experiencing regular provocations at the Polish-Belarusian border. And these are projects which are inspired by Lukashenko regime. And it's something what is confirmed, and there are articles research on it, how they are using it to make money for the officials of the Belarusian regime, but also to interfere in the security of the border with EU and NATO. And keeping in mind that Poland is the eastern flank of EU and NATO and Schengen area, we have to keep in mind that this is not only Polish border. So with that in mind, and the fact that the Polish border, for instance, with Ukraine was open for a few months at the early stage of full-scale invasion, when we almost literally everyone could cross the border from Ukrainian territory towards Poland. We understand that we have to have very sophisticated systems and very solid systems, so sophisticated to differentiate friends from enemies at the borders, but also fortifications in case of interference of the border, the provocations at the border, and there is understanding for it not only in Poland but also in EU and NATO. And with having in mind that the current Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, used to be very effective in Brussels as a president of European Council. He knows how the budgeting in EU works, and he was effectively in campaign advocating that the East Shield will be also a European project. And it looks that it will happen like that Ursula von der Leyen made him some promises that EU will cover expenses of increasing level of security at the eastern border, which is easy to justify for everyone. And so I think this project will be well financed, will have high priority in Poland and the EU, and is simply relevant because if you take a look a bit from the other side, from the Russian tactics in Donbas region or in occupied territory of Ukraine, we gave them enough time to build fortifications, and for that reason we were not able, those cherishing democracy, Ukrainians were not able to to have an effective counter-offensive because they fortified territory effectively. So we see even in contemporary warfare effectiveness of these primitive fortifications against sophisticated systems. In the end, human and equipment, vehicles struggle with the land. So that's the reason why we need this traditional fortification at the border with Belarus and Russia.
I think I'd like to move more from the military side towards more to the foreign policy issue. And I assume that at the core of Poland's internal debates about geopolitics and foreign policy, the threat of Russia and also the possibility of a Russian aggression towards NATO is probably at the center of it. And I quite often hear that the concern about the possibility of a Russian aggression towards NATO is a lot higher in Poland than basically anywhere else. And you've hinted at that, but what is this? If we're talking about the expert debate in Poland on this topic, what is the level of concern about the possibility of Russian aggression against NATO?
Well, actually, I can refer to recent opinion polls organized by the CBOS, Polish Opinion Poll Institute, and they evaluated that 87% of Poles perceive war in Ukraine as a potential direct threat to Poland. So it's a very high level, and 57% of Poles believe that Russia might challenge territory of NATO country. Mostly, if you will ask in details, probably they will name the Baltic states. And keeping this in mind, places Poland in a very important position, not only for our own country and our own security, but also security of the region, particularly Baltic states. From the strategic perspective, Baltic states, without support of Poland, are very difficult to be defended. It, of course, creates a certain space for closer ties between the region and Poland. So they understand that they need to be in good relations with Poland. And I think that Poland also took a lesson and learned how to work with also smaller neighbors. And sometimes in the past we were not, I would say, empathic enough towards their needs and their voices and concerns. I see that right now the coordination is at a much higher level. And so we understand in Poland that this war in Ukraine is a real threat. And I can even quote the Polish late president Lech Kaczynski, who in 2008 in Tbilisi at the manifestation when the aggression of Russia started, he said that today Georgia, tomorrow Ukraine, then Baltic states, and then maybe Poland. And he died in catastrophe in Smolensk 2010. And if we take a look back from the perspective, he was right. So of course, I hope that it will not happen the third and fourth steps, so the Baltics and the Poland. But this is a logical consequence of this kind of strategy by Russia. So if we will not stop it now, it's natural that they will have to continue, because this is the only logical from their perspective.
Just a quick break here to let you know that the corporate sponsor of this podcast is Conductor, which provides software for crisis exercises for everything from cyber threats and supply chain security to hybrid warfare. Thank you, Conductor, for sponsoring the podcast. And now, back to the conversation. One thing that's would play a major factor in all of this is the role of the United States in Europe and in NATO and its relations with Poland and the Baltic states. And Poland, the way I see it, has long tried to build very strong bilateral relations with the US. And I know that President Duda, or at least it's assumed that he's quite close to Donald Trump. I've heard even speculations that he was the one to convince him to get the Republicans to stop blocking the package for Ukraine. But how concerned is Poland about the possibility that in case Donald Trump wins, which is a very real alternative, that the US might withdraw fully or partially or in some way from Europe and sort of leave the European security to Europeans? What's the Polish view of this?
Well, I would say that in the first place, you're absolutely right. The Polish-American relations are very good. And they are based on a number of factors, including the fact that around 10 million of Americans perceive the Polish heritage as their personal one. So there is a Polish diaspora. But on the other hand, despite of the United States, I believe that Europe should take its own security seriously. And this strategic pause or this comfort or free ride, how Donald Trump is using it sometimes describing, shall end it independently who is in the White House. We should take responsibility for our own security. From the Polish perspective, looking at bilateral Polish-American relations or Euro-Atlantic relations, it was a continued strategy that Polish economy is based on the European pillar and security on American pillar. And that's something what was natural to us. But despite who will be in the White House, we have to be ready to take responsibility for our European security, and this is the narrative that Poland is playing, because this is what we can control. We cannot control who American society will choose as its next president. And I must say that I have quite vivid personal view who I believe would be better for our region, Poland and Central Eastern Europe. Being an organizer of the Warsaw Security Forum and traveling regularly to US, even recently for the NATO summit, and in the springtime to Congress. Actually, I was with a Weimar Triangle delegation, which we organized with the Polish, German, and French members of parliament to advocate for this bill of support for Ukraine, this package. When it was, I was in DC when it was adopted in the Congress. When it was, but I must say that I'm concerned when I look who is around Mr. Trump, because if you take a look at the first what Mr. Trump said about NATO countries, if they don't pay enough, Putin can do whatever he wants with them. If you take a look at J.D. Vance, who said straightforward that Ukraine could be, let's say, divided, that eastern parts of Ukraine could be an element of negotiations with Russia. I met in April with National Security Advisor to J.D. Vance, and that what he was telling me was astonishing. And I must say that there was a Yalta mentality. Real politics. So let's give up something to Russia for the sake of peace. We know it as Poles, what it means to be on the other side of this kind of deal, and how long does it take to get back to democratic countries' club and to get full independence. So from the Central Eastern European perspective, at least declarations of President Trump and J.D. Vance are concerning. If we take a look on the other side, at Kamala Harris herself, she is, of course, a symbol of continuation of Joe Biden policy. But, for instance, her running mate, Mr. Waltz, he is openly pro-Ukrainian and for Ukrainian support. He even signed between his state, Minnesota, and one of the regions of Ukraine, he signed a contract for reconstruction. I mean, the support that his state will help in reconstruction of Ukraine. And even the National Security Advisor to Kamala Harris, Mr. Phil Gordon, he was in Warsaw a few times. We're hosting him at the Warsaw Security Forum. I met with him in April, and he said that being in the region, primarily in Warsaw, he realized how important victory in Ukraine is for American credibility. And from this perspective, I prefer the democratic continuation. Even tactically, you don't change the leader at war. So continuation of the current administration would be more comfortable for Central Eastern Europeans, because they already know, and the new would have to adapt, and before they would take the seats, it would be a very uncertain time, which could be misused by our enemies.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you've mentioned about the discussion with J.D. Vance's National Security Advisor? What the views on Ukraine were?
Well, actually, I think I have never in my life met so pragmatic and cynical gentleman. He was thinking only at he would be perfect for a discussion about geopolitics and politics of superpowers, because this is the lens through which he is watching the world. But he perceives it more as a game, and maybe it's a lack of empathy or lack of regional experience. You know, you can do it if you are theoretic. And you are looking through the books only. But if you visit this region and you see that these people that are struggling in Ukraine are not much different from any state in US, maybe that would be a learning lesson. But anyway, without making these psychological exercises, what is the reason? The views are very realpolitik. So let's make a deal. Let's have a contract. We give up territories occupied by Russia right now. We give up Crimea. Let's focus right now on peace so people not die. And we'll get back to getting these regions reunited sometime in the future. And this is readiness right now to have this kind of compromise. So this is something very concerning, and I remember the faces of members of parliament. It was Norbert Rüttgen, for many years, and head of Foreign Affairs Committee of Bundestag, Paweł Kowal, current head of Foreign Affairs Committee in the Polish Parliament, and Nathalie Pouzier from Defense Committee from French Parliament, and they were really shocked. It was one of the most depressing meetings that we had for the whole week, and we had meetings, including with people from Pentagon, which are very pragmatic, or Marco Rubio, who simply lied us because he said that he will support the bill, and a few hours later he voted against it. So, but even they and those other sobering experiences were not so shocking, like the discussion with National Security Advisor to J.D. Vance. So choice for certain Eastern European interests is quite easy. And this is, of course, our pragmatic perspective from our region. For American people, maybe the choice could be different. But I'm looking from our perspective.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. If you'd like to hear the rest of it, you can find it on my Patreon. Click the link in the description or go to patreon.com/decodinggeopolitics. And if you decide to become a supporter, you get bonus content, Patreon-only episodes, and you will be able to ask questions to my future guests.